Welcome. This will be the March 26th meeting of the Everett Planning Commission and hearing on the riverfront redevelopment. Can we have a roll call?
Acting Chair Lavra.
Here.
Commissioner Tisdall.
Here.
Commissioner Yanasak.
Here.
Commissioner McGinn.
Here.
Commissioner Finch.
Here.
Do we have any commissioner reports?
None.
Okay. Staff reports, comments?
Nothing off the agenda tonight.
Thank you. So at this point, we're going to open the hearing, and I'm going to ask the commissioners if anyone has any personal interest or potential conflict of interest with this project. Okay, and if anybody else, I've got 3 speakers requested, but if anybody else wants to speak, they need to fill out a form, please. And
Thank you. Good evening, Alan Giffen, Planning Director, and tonight is advertised as a public hearing and decision meeting on the proposed amendments to the Plan Development Overlay Master Plan for the Riverfront Redevelopment and Development Agreement. The original plan was approved in 2009 for 3 sites along the riverfront: the Simpson property on the south, the Eclipse Mill property on the north, and in the middle of the landfill site. Tonight's hearing is only about changes proposed to the site plan and development agreement as it pertains to the landfill property. Because of the extent of the changes that are proposed under our code, it would be considered a major amendment that requires review by the Planning Commission and the City Council. And the role of the Planning Commission tonight is to determine if the proposed plan amendments meet the criteria stated in the zoning code, which I will cover here in just a moment. So do the changes that are proposed to the Plan Development Overlay Zone Master Plan meet the criteria of EMC Chapter 1929-050C, and I've stated those in the staff report that went to the Planning Commission. And also, do the amendments meet the criteria for a site-specific rezone, which an amendment to the Plan Development Overlay Zone would be considered under the code. And those criteria are also stated in the staff report, and we'll cover those a little bit more here. So for the review criteria of the Plan Development Overlay Zone, the purpose of the PDO overlay zone is to encourage creative master planning and to allow some flexibility in the application of permitted uses and development standards. But in exchange for that flexibility, there has to be some public benefit derived through the modification of the permitted uses or development standards. There are a number of other criteria that go along with this, including compatibility with the surrounding uses, visual impacts, public improvements that are proposed, and again, there has to be a public benefit to allowing for the modification of permitted uses or development standards. For the site-specific rezone review criteria, the proposal has to be consistent with comprehensive plan. The proposal must bear a substantial relation to the public health, safety, or welfare. It promotes the best long-term interests of the Everett community, and as a site-specific action, mitigates adverse impacts upon existing or anticipated land uses in the immediate vicinity. So we had a public workshop on February 26th that gave you an overview of the project and the review process. Sorry, that's an opportune time for me to interrupt myself here just a moment and point out the staff team that is here tonight. Seated to my right is Deputy Mayor Nick Harper, representing administration. We also have from the legal department Tim Benedict, and from our public works department traffic engineer Tim Miller and associate engineer Michael Brick, who also is involved in the review of the traffic information on this project. So if I turn my mic off, Nick is here to help me. So we also had a bit of exchange of some information yesterday. Chairperson Catherine Beck was unable to attend, and she provided a letter to the Planning Commission and staff which I responded to with some additional information. She was raising concerns about financial impacts of the project, long-term fiscal impacts of the proposed development, as well as cost of the city to maintain improvements within the development or the vicinity. In response to that info, we provided some information about costs that have gone into the reclamation of the landfill site, and particularly the cleanup following the tire fire in 1984, and a lot of the costs that are associated with preparing the site for development. We also provided some information from our finance department concerning the anticipated revenues from the project as proposed. I've got to say that the financial impact is something that very important in the consideration, but that is really the role of the City Council. There are a number of agreements that the City Council is involved with that are not part of the Planning Commission review process. Those include a property disposition agreement, a liability agreement related to the cleanup, and a consent decree with the Department of Ecology that all deal with costs of the landfill property. The focus of the Planning Commission is on the land use plans and whether or not they satisfy the criteria in the zoning code, since this is an amendment to an existing plan. However, it's certainly a very important part of the consideration, and the Planning Commission resolution has been modified to add an action recommended to the City Council to consider very closely and publicly the financial impacts of the development. So I've talked enough about the development criteria or the evaluation criteria here, but what we have is a much different project than was approved in 2009. In 2009, we had a retail shopping center, which at that time was expected to generate significant sales tax revenues for the city. And that was right at the beginning of the Great Recession, at which since that time we've learned a lot about just some fundamental shifts in our economy, and especially the consumer purchasing habits, where retail stores are not as lucrative for cities or even financially viable in a big box footprint as they were prior to the recession. And so what we have now instead is a very much different project. Shelter, the property owner and developer, proposes a mixed-use development that still maintains a number of features of the previously approved site plan, but it shifts from a primarily retail, major retail center to a mixed-use center with 1,250 multifamily housing units, with some retail, theater, specialty grocery store, potentially a medical office, a 250-room hotel, and large office building on the south part of the site. The previous plan also had a theater, grocer, offices, hotels, shops, and restaurants. The overall proposed plan includes 6 phases. As I mentioned, 1,250 housing units in phases 1 through 5. And in the first phase, the specialty grocer and the theater will be developed. And there will be ground floor retail uses on the ground floor of all buildings in phases 1 through 5, all the residential buildings, that is. And the possible medical office in phase 2, office building and a hotel in phase 6. Part of the attraction of the development that was incorporated in the original plan and is maintained in this plan is the public plaza and central gathering space. This is the proposed first phase of development. North would be to your right, and the let's see if we get this mouse to, I guess, there we go. The theater would be off up to the north. The public plaza to the east of the theater would be anchor the north end. The specialty grocer would anchor the south end of phase 1, and there would be then 4 residential buildings with, again, the ground floor retail space, but 5 stories of housing above the ground floor. 4 buildings, about 295 housing units in this first phase. And so a lot of the drawings and graphics that you saw at the February 26th meeting represented the images of what is contemplated with that phase 1. The primary differences that are proposed as part of this plan are a substantial decrease in the amount of retail space, over 500,000 square feet less of retail development than in the previous plan, and a significant increase in the housing, 1,250 units. While the previous development agreement, or the currently effective development agreement that Shelter proposes to amend, would allow for up to 400 units on this site, the conceptual plan that has been adopted for the site had no housing. And so one of the discussion points we had in some email exchanges with the commission were asking questions about number of housing units and increase in housing units. So the total number of housing units proposed, 1,250, is starting from a blank slate from the current plan. So although 400 would have been allowed, they were never proposed in the previous site plan. Hope that answered one of the questions that I saw earlier. So the things that remain the same, however, would be the meandering Main Street, that the very pedestrian-oriented Main Street that the retail shops will be oriented towards, the public plaza within the theater area, and the grocery store was always part of the original development plan. Now, on this graphic, we're showing the Riverfront Plaza near the theater, which would be at the top of the screen, or the west side of the development. And in phase 3 would be the central gathering space as the development gets built out on the east side of Riverfront Boulevard and closer to the river. That central gathering space would continue that nice open space area that connects the theater on the west end to the river on the east end. There will be a promenade at the east end of the site, or an overlook area for the riverfront, with a trail connection that goes down to the riverfront trail that's already in place along the east side. One of the changes that's proposed is to amend the building heights. This is the slide out of the current master plan that shows the permitted heights on all 3 properties, and you'll notice in the area, it doesn't show up very well on with the yellow font here, but this area of the landfill site is allowed 65 feet height with a 10 feet increase for things like elevator shafts or mechanical penthouse on the roof of a building. This area that's outlined in blue would be allowed a 100-foot height, building height, within the current plan. The proposed plan would be to change that so that the entire landfill site would have a 75-foot height limit, again with that 10-foot potential for rooftop appurtenances. This would not change any of the building heights that are allowed on either the Simpson pad or the Eclipse Mill site. There are also some changes proposed for the, well, within the proposed development agreement, there will be a number of changes. There would be a new project description to reflect the mix of uses, including housing and the amount of office development, retail development within the landfill site. There are some revised plan graphics that show revisions to the street concept at 36th Street and the central gathering space, a little bit more detail. I shared you with that with you a moment ago. It shows the phasing of the landfill development. The multifamily property tax exemption is something that is proposed, and that's listed in the development agreement. One of the things that is changing, and we would consider that a public benefit to the city, would be that the developer has agreed to take on the responsibility to build the 3-acre riverfront park just to the north of the subject property, which had been previously a responsibility of the city. And so the development agreement also includes the building elevations that are proposed for Phase 1 that we shared with you in the previous February 26th public workshop. There will also be amendments to the attachments. Attachment D is the overall site plan and the building heights that I mentioned a moment ago. Attachment F contains the development standards, and it's a fairly lengthy document. And there's just a few minor changes that are proposed to that. One of those would be to change the parking standard for housing for 2 or more bedroom units. The current standard is 1.5 spaces, while the proposed change would be 1.2 spaces for 2 or more bedroom units. Attachment F also has a proposed change for the open space standard that's based on the entire landfill site and not on individual phases. Attachment G includes the design guidelines, and it will incorporate some of the building renderings for Phase 1 that you've seen previously, and some other minor revisions that don't really change the character or quality of the project, but some updated information such as the street cross sections for the Riverfront Boulevard and 36th Street. And Attachment I is a listing of the mitigation requirements from the environmental impact statement that was published in 2008 that identified a long list of mitigation requirements for the entire development, and these amendments would only pertain to the landfill site without significantly changing the mitigation. It updates it for this project. So as I mentioned earlier, part of the consideration here is what are the public benefits to be derived through the amendment of the master plan. And so during the last go-round in 2009, when the City Council approved the current master plan, there was a lot of public amenities that were provided. We shared those with you in the February 26th workshop. I have more slides here if you want to see any of those, but about half of the site remains in open space, wetlands. There was a lot of habitat restoration, wetland restoration. There were public trails that have been extended, and additional, the 3-acre park would be one of the public amenities that was part of the original plan. And as I mentioned, one of the public benefits is to the city's coffers would be for the developer taking responsibility for the 3-acre park, and that first phase will be done concurrently with the first phase of development of the landfill site. Another public benefit is that we didn't have any housing within that previous project, and with the growing need for housing and affordable housing in our community, that's one of the proposals that, or one of the parts of the plan that we see as a public benefit. Other benefits would be the current plan just is not financially viable, the large retail shopping center. And so instead of having an empty site that with a plan that nobody can build, we've got a developer that wants to build a mixed-use neighborhood with primarily residential use, but also a mix of uses that would attract other people from Everett and the surrounding communities, as well as enjoying the amenities that are attached to the site, including the trails and so forth. And so the changes in the proposed development agreement will maintain the quality that was established through the original development standards and design guidelines, with a few modifications, but not too many. And so the staff is recommending that the Planning Commission approve or recommend to the City Council that the Council approve the amendment to the master plan, along with amendments to the development agreements that were included in your packet and summarized in my presentation. And you have a revised resolution that's been put in front of you tonight. The revised resolution, as I mentioned a little earlier, has a few edits from the version that was sent out in your packet last week, based upon some of the comments from Chairperson Beck and some responses from the city on in in support of some of the comments that Chairperson Beck had offered. So with that, I am happy to pause and answer any questions that you may have. We do have the shelter team here tonight that has a presentation for you before we get to the public hearing, but if there are any questions that I can answer at this time or any of the city staff, you can decide if you want to talk about those now or later. Following the public testimony and the closure of the public hearing, at that point I think would be a good time for you to get all of your questions answered from either the city team or the developers teams.
Are there any questions at this time?
I have one question about the 3-acre park. Shelter's responsible for building the park itself, but who's responsible for the ongoing maintenance of the park? Is it Shelter or the city?
That'll be a city park, and therefore the Parks Department will be
Okay.
responsible for its maintenance.
Okay.
Alan, I wanted to ask about your memo from March 20th, and where you laid out the Municipal Code 1929, the basis for approval of alternative development standards, and then there's also in the zoning code, the criteria that we're to consider. I'm just trying to understand that, do all of those apply, or we're applying one of those standards from the 19.29 to part of this, and then the zoning amendment to just the DA? Or are they different, or are they all the same, or is this for everything?
That's a great question. And the criteria for the, in chapter 1929.050, basis for alternative development standards under the plan development overlay, it's very broad because it's a code section that anticipates any number of possible projects. And so the purpose of these is for all of those criteria to enter into the consideration by the Planning Commission, and particularly important at the first time a master plan is proposed. In this case, we're looking at an amendment to the master plan, so I would say that a lot fewer of these are open questions at this point. I think the main one that I've tried to focus in the Commission's attention on is the public benefit derived by approving an amendment to the master plan. There's certainly a number of other things that are fair consideration. So, for example, the unique characteristics of the property or the proposed uses or impacts on the surrounding area. All of those things are fair items for the Commission to consider. Then that's for the under the plan development overlay zone. The rezone criteria are even a little bit more generalized, and so, but those are certainly findings that are required to be considered in the Planning Commission's review, and we've put proposed findings and conclusions in the resolution for the Planning Commission.
And so just some understand kind of the scope of what we're dealing with here as the Planning Commission, as opposed to what the council's job is going to be. And I mean, the agreement that was signed in, was it 2009 initially, I mean, that's all set. We're moving, that's all in the past. We're not here to reconsider all of those aspects or that part of the agreement. We're here just looking at this proposal for the changes from the 2006
master plan and development agreement.
There's the master plan then that was amended again in 2014, right?
Right, it was amended for the 2 residential parcels in 2000.
And so we're only looking at the changes from the 2014 to now, essentially.
Oh, yeah, there were no changes to the landfill site at that time, so.
Okay.
Still, the decision made in 2009 for the landfill site is what's currently in effect and what is proposed to be amended.
And so we're only looking at the changes from the initial landfill site to
The
today.
proposed plan,
And
correct.
the standard we're applying then is from the 1929-050 and from the zoning code 1941-160.
Correct.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay. At this point, I will open the hearing to public comment.
I think we want to hear from Shelter first.
Oh, we want to hear from them? Okay, I'm sorry.
Right, that's how we queued it
It's
up.
not on my agenda.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I'm Gary Young with Shelter Holdings, and thank you, Ellen, for the overview and the introduction and all your work to date and staff's work. And Planning Commission members, we're honored to be here on behalf of the Shelter team. We're very excited about this new redevelopment of Riverfront and excited to move forward. A couple of things. One, for some of our participants that may not have been to previous meetings, my partner Jeff Gow and I are the founders of Shelter, of our Shelter company, and we are also the land owners of the Riverfront property. Over a period of, I guess, 35 years, we're a family-owned business. Our roots are firmly planted in the Puget Sound area. We've been actively building all kinds of different exciting developments, including, I have to be careful about my microphone, including high-rise, mixed-use, master plan communities, retail, residential. In addition, we're very actively engaged in the community of Everett. Over the years, we actively have been supporting SHAC, the YMCA on their ongoing annual expenditures to run the Y, and we're also a significant supporter and donor towards the brand new building that's under construction now for the new YMCA facility, which is a very exciting project. We're also active supporters of the Village Theater and all the youth programs that are available here in Everett, Housing Hope, and Victim Support Services. Today marks another significant step in what has been a long and collaborative process with the city of Everett and the community. We started with the property in 2013, and in 4 years of working with a fairly significant large retailer, we were saddened a number of years back that destiny didn't come forward. And maybe in a way I feel it's kind of a blessing, because as we move forward now, the world has changed fairly significantly, and the world of retail in particular and how this type of development would work is really a much different world than the vision that came in the very beginning. But we're also, I feel, very close to that vision in the context of the desire to have an opportunity to have a retail center and a sense of community established in such a beautiful location by the river, and also to energize the city, so to speak, with additional retail. Essentially, our riverfront plan that we're looking at is the result of all the input from the community, the businesses that are excited about being here. So it's really a combination of those things, and also the entertainment component. So as we move forward to create attractive, viable centers, the entertainment part, here we have the cinema, but also all the other opportunities, yoga studios, all the parts that come into this part of the community. They're essentially kind of linked now as we look at new developments and you study all the successful new programs coming out across our country. There's a strong link between housing and the centers. And so we all know we have essentially a housing crisis in our area of affordability and opportunity. But we also have an incredible environment here that's very exciting. And so as we combine looking at our 1,250 units, they energize and support the businesses that are excited to come here, and also help all the residents that are already here in this neighborhood and nearby to enjoy this beautiful opportunity. So developers always love talking about their projects, so I better move along. As the oldest member of our team, and one that has lived through many economic cycles and recessions, and worked with many of the tenants that we're working with here on this project, I can attest that your support of the Planning Commission, support of members of the audience and the community at large are very important. Many of these tenants that we've reached out to, they want to know that their investment will be secure and their stores will be welcomed and supported by the community. Many make this as a part of their location criteria and why they're coming here. So being able to demonstrate that we have your support is an effective way for us to help us with our project moving forward and to give the assurances to them. So I just want to in advance to be sure to ask you for your support and all the members of the community, because that's very important as we move forward now to the City Council. So moving along now, both Tia and Eric Evans are here as a part of our shelter company, and Tia will now come forward and introduce our team, which has been working, well, we've been at this for 5-6 years now, so we have a very seasoned, strong team, and we're excited for them to present to you. Thanks, Tia.
Thanks, Gary, and thanks for having us here tonight, Planning Commission. And also want to echo Gary's thanks to Alan and the rest of the city staff, because we've been working long and hard with them to develop this proposal and to get it in shape to bring to you tonight. So as Gary and Alan have explained, this is a complex project, but we have a strong team of professionals that are helping us put it together. And we have a few of them here tonight that you'll hear from. You'll hear from Chris Forrester at 10W, our traffic engineer, Nick Hagan at Weissman Design Group regarding the landscaping and open spaces, and John Woodworth at SMR Architecture regarding the architecture and design elements. As Gary explained several years ago when we started to reimagine what this riverfront development could be, we looked at other successful lifestyle centers and tried to identify how they'd changed over the 10 to 15 years since the riverfront was initially planned and what things we thought made them successful. So one of the obvious changes was the effect that Amazon and online shopping had on retail changed the nature of retail and what could be successful. We noticed that modern centers tended to function as multi-purpose entertainment destinations rather than just a place that you would go to buy something. They were anchored by entertainment uses or experiences rather than just by big box stores. We noticed how it was important to be able to accommodate and encourage community gathering spaces that could be used for events or farmers markets, things like that. We noticed how important walkability and the pedestrian experience is. And we also noticed how successful centers include a residential element in order to create the 24-hour presence and activation that both draws in and supports on an ongoing basis the type of retail that creates that experience that people want to have. So all of that went into developing this proposal, and we hope that that helps you to have a little bit of insight as to what we were considering as we came up with this. Tonight we really wanted to try to focus on answering some of the questions that we heard coming from you guys and from the public last time we were here. And before I turn it over to our consultants to do that, there were two issues that I wanted to touch on briefly. One was the park location. There were some questions about why didn't we put the park in the middle of the project. And the easy answer to that is that the 3-acre park is already owned by the city. So that's a separate parcel next to our project that the city owns, and the city was scheduled to do the improvements there. Under this proposal, we will make the improvements, but that remains a city asset. The more complex answer is that the developing open spaces, especially green spaces on the landfill, is tricky, and I will leave it to Nick to explain why that is, but basically because you can't let the groundwater go into the landfill, so it makes having large green spaces a little bit more difficult. The other one was just a general concern about more residential or residential not having been included in the initial plan and the number of units that we have included here. I think it's important to understand that when the city embarked on this whole planning process for redevelopment of the riverfront site, and at that point they were talking about all 3 sites, both the landfill and the 2 residential pieces on either end, they did a full environmental impact statement, and as part of that there was a preferred alternative, and in that preferred alternative there were 1,400 residential units. The 2 residential sites ended up being developed at in less density than had initially been anticipated. So when you look at it from the preferred alternative versus what would be the end result with our proposal and the 2 Polygon projects that are already built out or mostly built out. It's only a change of about 275 residential units and a decrease of around 500,000 square feet of commercial or retail use. So that more than offsets, and it's well below sort of the threshold that was considered in the environmental impact statement. And the benefit then of having the residential now vertically integrated with the retail from a market perspective is important, because that's what helps us draw in the types of retail users that we are hearing from the community that you really want on this site. So with that, I will turn it over to Chris Forrester to talk to you a little bit about the transportation analysis.
Thank you, Tia. Good evening, commissioners. My name is Chris Forster. I'm with 10W. We are the transportation consultant. We conducted the transportation assessment for the project. Just to give you a quick background, I'm a professional traffic engineer. I've been working in this profession for over 20 years, doing traffic studies and impact analysis for development projects throughout the region. We do have a lot of history on this, on the Everett Riverfront site. We've worked on this site for over 7 years, since Polygon started their developments for the Simpson and Eclipse pads. And then over the past few years, we've been working with Shelter on advising them on this site specifically. We've also been involved and worked closely with city staff, Michael Brick, the associate traffic engineer, on a number of development projects and traffic studies for other projects throughout the city. So when a development application comes in for this site, the city requires that we basically do a check-in on trip generation. And so that was what we were required to do for this site. We need to do that check to make sure that the EIS that was done in 2008 covers the impacts of the proposed project. And so when I say trip generation, I'm talking mainly about the PM peak hour trip generation. It was determined in the EIS that the PM peak hour trip generation is critical in this area. All the mitigation in the EIS was based on PM peak hour impacts. And so the numbers that I'll speak to later are PM peak hour numbers. So as you know, the Everett Riverfront EIS done in 2008, the preferred alternative analyzed the impacts of 800,000 square feet of retail, 100,000 square feet of office use. There were 555 residential units in the analysis and a 250-room hotel. So although the current proposal would result in more residential units than what was originally analyzed, the current plan has significantly less retail, 230,000 versus 800,000. So this is the primary reason why the trip generation during that PM peak is so much less than the EIS. So in the preferred alternative in the EIS, 2,200 new PM peak hour trips were generated. And then as part of that, those 2,200 PM peak hour trips were used and used in the traffic analysis to come up with the mitigation. There was 3 primary mitigations in the EIS and subsequent development agreement. The first one was payment toward a future traffic signal at the intersection of Pacific Ave and the I-5 northbound off-ramp. The second mitigation was payment toward a future traffic signal at Lenora Street and 2nd Ave. And the third was payment of impact fees. So for this project, we prepared a trip generation estimate that accounts for the cumulative impact of what has already been built, so the Simpson and Eclipse pads, as well as all 6 phases of the proposed commercial development. Our findings indicated that upon full build out of all 6 phases, the cumulative total PM peak hour trips from Simpson, Eclipse, the commercial pad would be over 40% less than what was anticipated in the EIS, and that's during the PM peak. Specifically, about 1,300 new PM peak hour trips are anticipated compared to 2,200 in the EIS. So overall, our analysis confirmed that the project falls well within the bounds of the EIS, and that all the traffic mitigation outlined in the EIS will adequately mitigate any and all project impacts. This analysis that we prepared was reviewed by the city's traffic engineer, and he concurred with our findings. Just before I end, I wanted to touch on a comment that was received shortly before the meeting from Commissioner Zielinski. The commissioner brought up the question about just being so many more residential units in this proposal versus the EIS. Wouldn't that generate more traffic, directionally at least, during the AM peak? You know, everybody leaving these residences, going to the freeway or whatever. We're typically not required to do an AM peak hour analysis in most areas. It's kind of on a project by project basis that you'd have to do that. In this area, based on discussions with the city's associate traffic engineer, AM peak hour is not critical in this area, and in particular in the outbound direction in the AM peak. Most of the traffic from this site is going to be destined to 41st. I think it's about 80%, 20% is the split that is estimated. And in that direction, in the AM peak right now, there's just mostly the traffic coming from Simpson, coming up the hill and going up 41st to the freeway. There's plenty of capacity for that AM peak hour trip generation, even if the trip generation number is higher than what was analyzed in the EIS. And based on the associate traffic engineer, Mr. Brick, he conducted an initial analysis to show that there was slightly more trips during the AM peak in the outbound direction. But just based on our discussions and my experience and his professional opinion, we don't believe that there's any new impacts that are created by that additional AM peak hour trip demand. And another statistic that I found is that in the EIS there was 1,100 outbound AM peak hour trips generated, and the AM peak hour trip generation, the revised number with all this new residential, would still be below that threshold. So in that way, the EIS is still anticipating that there's plenty of capacity for that directional trip generation. Sorry if I didn't explain that correctly or very clearly, but I'd be happy to answer any questions now or after the applicant.
I have a question.
Sure.
When you, in your field, when you talk about impacts,
Yeah.
What would that look like? What does that mean in lay terms? What would that look like on the ground?
Impacts?
Yeah, what impact? Yeah, what does that mean?
We define impact based on a threshold. I mean, every city has different thresholds and standards. And I'm sure you've heard the term level of service. Cities adopt level of service standards. So for example, level of service E might be level of service standard. And so if your project triggers an impact, then, well, there's impacts and there's significant impacts and there's impacts. You could argue that one trip at an intersection is an impact, but that would typically considered an insignificant impact. So we measure it in terms of trips at intersections, and then those trips play into the volumes at the intersection, and then we run a level of service analysis. And all this was documented in the EIS, for this project.
I guess I'm just wondering,
So.
is an impact like a delay in getting from point A to point B? And does it have to reach a certain threshold before?
That's what level of service is, A, B, C, D, E, F.
Got it.
And that level of service A is a certain number of seconds of delay caused by that intersection.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Any other traffic questions? Okay.
I guess I do have one other question, if I can.
Okay.
When you do a traffic study, you're talking about flow of traffic. Do you also consider parking issues, or is that a separate?
It's
someone
kind
else
of a
does that?
separate issue because in the traffic world, trip generation, when we talk about trip generation trips are based on the amount of land use, not the amount of parking. They're kind of separate issues. I mean, they are interrelated, but not directly. There's trip generation and trip generation rates, and there's parking generation and parking generation rates. Two different things, really.
Okay, thank you.
While Alan's getting the graphic up, I'll introduce myself. I'm Nick Hagan. I'm a landscape architect at Weisman Design Group, where I'm a principal and owner. And I've been working in the area for 25 years. I've had the great pleasure to be working with Gary and his team at Polygon and Shelter for probably 20 or more years on master plan communities throughout the area. And do most of my work in Puget Sound, whether it's mixed-use residential, commercial spaces, public schools, you name it. We've done quite a bit of work, and it's all focused in this area. So Chris talked about the vehicular circulation, and I'm going to go into some pedestrian circulation and how that informed the site plan, and then talk about the major open space, the central gathering area, and then get into some of the landscape character that we've been developing and some of the unique challenges that the landfill site poses. So here's a circulation diagram. North is over here to the right, if you guys can follow the cursor. And so we look at circulation from a pedestrian standpoint, both regionally, so connecting to the new neighborhoods to the south and to the north, connecting to the 3-acre park, which is down in the lower right-hand corner on the screen, and then as well as, there's pedestrian connectivity all the way up 41st. But really we want to focus tonight on the internal circulation and how that kind of set up the site plan that you see before you. So we have Riverfront Boulevard that we have on-street parking. There's sidewalks that are adjacent to that on-street parking. And then there's going to be a landscape strip, and then there's going to be an additional pedestrian walkway that's adjacent to buildings. And I'll kind of explain more why that's set up like that as we go through the slides. So that's our main east-west spine, or north-south spine. But we're also looking at how do we get, through the site. So we've got these east-west pedestrian connections that align through the parking lot with walkways and in between the buildings themselves and these kind of paseo spaces. And then that also creates some view corridors that link the site visually and physically to the river. So you'll see that through each of these areas, whether it's along the drive or in between buildings. So we keep repeating that as you go north. And then also looking at our kind of secondary pedestrian spines, we've developed this north-south promenade that links, which could be an office building to the north, the theater, and then the grocery to the south. So really developing certain hierarchies of pedestrian movement. And then they all kind of culminate in the central gathering area that leads to the riverfront kind of overlook. And then also having that overlook connect down to the regional trail. So we're looking at those ways of people moving through the site. We'll zoom in on kind of what those spaces look like between the building in a second here. But while I've got this exhibit up, just want to point out our proximity to the river, and we've been using that as this way of influencing our landscape design, taking the cues that the river itself presents with its colors, its textures, the natural the natural feel of this area, and then combining it with this more industrial landscape that's to the west, this more gritty, urban, kind of tough landscape. And we're looking how that might how that marries itself in the development of this project. So flipping to the public plaza plan, this is our central gathering. So it's right at the heart of the project. And that connects the theater all the way down to the river. It carries through the Riverfront Boulevard. And what you can see here is that the idea of the river and the kind of the confluence of currents kind of creates these eddies. That what they're doing is they're starting to separate different kind of sizes of spaces in this central gathering area. Adjacent to the buildings, we've got smaller, more intimate spaces for cafes, restaurants to break out, for people that live in those buildings to kind of have their own space. It's a smaller scale. And then the kind of the larger community spaces are in the middle through here. And so these sort of eddies kind of create that separation. The reason we left the middle area kind of large is we want this to be a flexible space. We want there to be room to have farmers markets, to have craft fairs, to have, you know, concert series in the summer, to really give Everett a place that it might not have at the moment. So that's the main sort of concept of this sort of flexible space. And these images to the right start to give the flavor of what that might feel like. That kind of flow of the current is what we're showing. And just kind of looking at the materials that we might be presenting, whether there's some natural boulders, timber and steel, that's more of that kind of gritty architecture. Looking at how we might treat the pavement in ways that help strengthen that idea of the river through here by different textures and materials through that space. And so that's what we're seeing as kind of the main open space. We also, you know, recognize that there's the 3-acre park next door, you know, that may be more playground and kid focused, but looking also for opportunities to have some whimsical elements in here that parents could bring their kids to play on, even though it's a more urban experience. And it does, we think, gives some variety. So zooming in a little bit on the landscape character and a little bit more on the pedestrian circulation, this right here is one of those east-west circulation spines. In this case, building C, that would kind of lead to leasing and kind of one of their main commercial type spaces. We're looking at some potential canopies on some of these walkways to help with wayfinding. That could have vegetation growing on them and have lighting incorporated. So we see that happening in the east-west direction and in the north-south direction. And then starting to zoom into the buildings, I know there's some concern about what the space feels like in between these the buildings, where it gets a little bit narrow. And what we're seeing is that kind of hardscape area that feels inviting, though. We've got a little bit of landscaping. I think John, when he shows some architecture, we're looking at overhead lighting in there. And then knowing what the building's uses are, if there's restaurant spaces on these corners, that if somebody's parked through here and we have some nice wayfinding elements that gets you between the buildings to these spaces, that'll help to kind of enliven these corridors. And also back behind the buildings, we've got like a landscape buffer area that's separating our parking field from the building and kind of creating some areas for respite, some tables, chairs out there, other types of seating elements that we can really kind of activate all four sides of each of these buildings. Same would happen with Building D. So we're really seeing these as kind of multifaceted buildings that have activity all the way around them. And we're going to try and kind of hide those functions that are more service related, where the trash is, where a fire sprinkler room is, so that people are encouraged to walk all the way around the buildings. If I kind of zoom over to some of the images, we're again looking at boulders, cobbles, things that you'd find along a riverbed, plants that are more adapted to wet, dry conditions that you'd find next to a river. So a lot of our native species, a lot of our grass species would work that way. And then looking at how the furniture materials might be, this is kind of wood and steel, whether it's done in this configuration or on top of concrete seat walls. Maybe it's just large timber seats, kind of a variety of different styles, but they all kind of relate back to the river idea and back to that kind of industrial, tough idea, that gritty nature. So then just to kind of get into some of the complexities of the site. We're on a landfill, and that has some unique challenges. One is we can't penetrate the top surface. You know, the landfill's capped to trap in methane gas. We don't want water sinking in, and we don't want gas coming out. So we're essentially creating a barrier. And so any landscape area is going to have to be elevated up above this barrier. So essentially, each one is a bathtub. And so it's exactly the wrong way that you would design a landscape, but it's done all the time on rooftop gardens. So it's something we're familiar with doing. And so we need to provide soil volume for that. We need to provide drainage for that. And we can do that in a variety of ways through mounding up the larger spaces, through adding retaining walls, whether they're concrete or stacked stone or wood, just a kind of variety of ways of doing that. But kind of keeping in mind that everything we do has to get built up. So one thing that's different about this project is there's not a lot of trees. We're really only focusing on trees in the middle central gathering spaces. And that's because we've got kind of large enough areas to build up the soil needed for trees. And we have the ability to put seeding and other elements that would kind of help support that elevated soil. And now the other challenge is settlement. So not only do we can't penetrate the ground surface, it's going to settle. It's going to settle, according to the geotechnical engineers, maybe as much as 30 inches in 50 years. And some of that settlement is going to happen pretty rapidly in the next 10 years. So how do we deal with that is a concern of ours. So the buildings are going to be all pile supported. They're not going to move. But what we're looking at doing is supporting the walkways that are immediately adjacent to the building. They'll be cantilevered, and they're not going to go anywhere. And the reason we did that is because all your doors along your building, you need to have ADA access to it. You need to make sure that people can get around the buildings. And so there's not landscaping, kind of foundation landscaping that you normally see. So it's a little different in that regard. And then we've created some larger areas between our on-street parking and that walkway and this walkway against the building to have the landscape areas so we can mount them, and then have these narrower paths that can kind of settle out over time and still be ADA accessible, or if they need to rebuild them, can be rebuilt without rebuilding a larger area. So that's why you kind of see this. It's a little more unique landscape, but I think it'll give the project its own character and sense of place that you won't really find elsewhere because of, you know, the conditions that we're working with. So I think that's all I was going to talk about, unless you guys have any questions. John's going to jump into architecture.
Any questions?
Okay.
All right, thanks, Nick. My name is John Woodworth. I'm a principal and owner at SMR Architects. I've been working with Eric here for probably 10 years, so I guess I'm the new one on the team. We have a long history of working with him and now with Shelter. I've just completed a couple hundred units on 2 projects called Ravello and Upton, which have been referenced on earlier meetings as kind of a style point to look forward on this work. It's been a little while since we've worked in Everett. Our last project was the Art Space Everett project, which is now the home of the Shack Art Center, project that we're pretty proud of and pretty exciting. It's a fun site to work on as an architect. There isn't a lot of context because it's just a huge empty slate, so we get to choose some of that context. And it's kind of that challenge of trying to find and define what it is, whether it's pieces we're drawing from local lumber mills or aerospace or pieces of the river on site. It's been a lot of fun. I think my task tonight is to quickly kind of introduce you to the 6 buildings that are here, allow you to ask questions after the rest of the public comments. Unlike Nick, I get to penetrate the landfill. I get to go down and put piles down. So my buildings are going to stay very steady. The landscaping is working around. So, and Nick did a good job of describing how we're going to be interfacing and using the spaces between the building and the sidewalks to kind of accept that change over the years. A couple images here, just what we're looking for. Nick was alluding to some of these small pockets where the buildings come together. We see them as little eddies, places for people to gather, informal areas, lots of night lighting. We expect them to be kind of pretty animated. In the project, we have a lot of work to do on street furniture and places where we have small plazas that'll be working for people. And I'm going to kind of start with a walk down Everett Riverfront Drive here and go from building what we call the grocery store to building ABCD and then to the movie theater. The materials we're using are a mix of concrete siding, concrete, metals, rusting steel, and I've brought a number of samples over there at the kind of appropriately named media table. You have in your packet the elevations with pictures of the siding, but if you wanted to actually feel the materials, here's an opportunity for you to do so. When we started on the project, we had some public meetings, and one of the things that people said is they didn't want it to be Mill Creek, they didn't want it to be University Village, they wanted it to be Everett, they wanted it to be gritty and a little bit industrial. So we've tried to take some cues off that into our projects. As you walk up Riverfront, the first building you're going to see is the market. And what we wanted to create here was a kind of iconic small grocery building with doors that open up that display the wares, allow a lot of light in. We're looking for a large clear story on top, again, bringing more light in and focusing on a large kind of iconic industrial style sign you might have seen on an old factory, just identifying this is Riverfront, this is the market. That building is going to be consistently some masonry, steel siding, some panel siding, and kind of aluminum storefront. Building A is our first residential building. We wanted to have each building have kind of a large roof element to identify kind of a prominent corner on this. This is the corner that kind of abuts the grocery store. We're still in negotiations with the grocery store, so we don't know the exact configuration, but we've been tasked to kind of give them an idea of what this is going to need to look like to fit into the development. So we've given them also a little corner there that we'd like to see open up against the new residential building. All the buildings are 6 stories. They contain that corner element. The strip of balconies that you can see going down here, that's right above the residential entry. We'll have a large protruding canopy that comes out over that entry. We're covering about 50% of the storefronts within each building with canopies. These storefronts here are a kind of a picture frame that we're going to use around it, kind of accented with wood. This is building B. We're planning for kind of a restaurant on this corner, that would be ideal. So we've given it the largest canopy on this building to kind of extend into that corner. It'll be right there at a street intersection. And we're hoping to kind of call a lot of detail to it. We don't have, it's named the Lansdowne. We don't have working names for them, but one of the ideas we were working here was to kind of use names from old lumber mills. And so we've got a big vertical blade sign there with a wood type material there with backlit lettering. Okay. Sorry, I'm a little, it's a little sensitive. Building C, as we move down, is the primary leasing center for the project. We anticipate that this will be the first stop for people that come in to look at the project, interested in leasing a unit. We'll have about a 2,000 square foot leasing center with kind of displays and folks to greet and lead people through the facility. We're trying to upscale that corner to really make it pop out using some rusting metal and some large blade signs there. And again, having that corner element, all glass, large canopy. It's a little hard to see in this image. And as we move down, this is building D. Another site we'd like to see a restaurant come into this corner. This has probably got the largest extended canopy. Here it's probably about 20 feet deep. We expect to have outdoor tables and seating there. We've brought vertical metal siding into the building on the corner. We've included some recesses where we've got some kind of lit lettering, identify the building, identify where the merchant might be, where their advertising might be. And as you can see over to the right-hand side, you're starting to see the edge of the theater where we've got an iconic large sign for the theater to kind of identify that use. This is the last building in Phase A. The theater, we're looking at this one to be kind of reflective of what it might have been like an old industrial building or a power plant that's been repurposed, large commercial windows, some masonry, brick or concrete block that form the building. Another iconic sign to identify this as an important part. This really heads up the top of that public park. And it's behind that sign, we've got probably about a 10-foot tall kind of a screen wall that'll kind of glow at night, and we're using that to hide all the mechanical equipment on top of the building. And this image was kind of rendered with one of the anticipated street fairs that'll happen that Nick will plan for. And that's kind of the quick overview of kind of 6 very complex buildings that occupy the site. I can take questions now, or if you want to save them for after what Eric's statements are.
Question. How do the building heights vary in Phase 1 for buildings A, B, and C?
They're relatively the same height. We're using a pretty standard method of construction of 5 floors over 1. We have taken, we're anticipating on this corner building on A and the corner building on D, we're going to have floor-to-floor heights on the first floor roughly 3 feet higher than the other buildings. What we're trying to do is give more space for the commercial tenant, even potentially a mezzanine there. So we'll have we're about 18 feet of floor-to-floor height in there as opposed to 15 on the others. The roof form itself is probably at its height, probably 4 to 5 feet higher than the rest of the building.
Okay, great. And also, I see roof decks proposed in Phase, I think it's Phase 3 and Phase 4. Are there roof decks proposed in Phase 1?
We have roof decks. We're going to have roof decks on the 6th floor of the building. We've actually located them on the back side of the building, facing west.
Thank you.
They'll be essentially small cutouts. And I realized as I spun through here that I didn't cover my materials slide there. So just an idea of some of the the materials that we're looking at for the buildings, which are represented over here on the side.
Could you explain the decision to face toward the freeway rather than toward the water, toward the riverfront with the roof decks?
Well, we're trying to keep those just as kind of small, just small gathering areas. We wanted them to be something to acknowledge that side of the project. There is, nice views up that hill as well. It's currently on the projects as they face east. They'll have beautiful cascade views, but as the further phases get built up, you would just be looking at the next building. So it's nice to look at both sides. We have large, the large park planned that'll have views to the east. We're looking at in the further phases to have 2 very large roof decks on the building that's open to all of the buildings that do face east. So it's kind of trying to mix it up a little bit, provide a little bit of roof deck on each one of these buildings before we can get to the last 2 phases, which provide those larger, big roof decks, which would be more of much more of a recreation opportunity. The roof decks on these projects will be small gatherings, barbecues. We'll have a fire pit out there. They're a little smaller than this room. If that's it for the questions, we'll take public questions in a minute. Yeah.
So we're going to hold off the public questions till the public comments?
I'd like to
or how are we
introduce
gonna do- okay.
Eric, who's going to finish up.
Yeah, thank you.
Eric Evans, Shelter Holdings. It's good to be back again. Thanks for everyone for coming. I hope it's clear from all the work that we've been working on this for a very long time, almost 5 years. I hope it's also clear that a lot of these ideas, they didn't originate with us. They came from the community, the roof forms. I think there's a woman in the community who tells me I should have an airplane wing on every building. But some of that is here in terms of that building D. The industrial materials, the character, all that came from the community meeting and has helped informed our work. And I think with staff's input, the project's the better for it. The plan has been driven to try to balance kind of a lot of disparate forces here. The community's desire for an engaging retail, the kind of changing nature of retail itself, the environmental constraints of the physical construction on the landfill, the need for housing and a variety of housing to support the retail, and also the clear requirement that the project has to be financially viable. It has to be economically viable for us to move it forward. We're very, very proud of this plan, all the work. I'm very, very proud of this plan and all the team's work, and the incorporation of the ideas. We believe it will be a wonderful addition to Everett, and that we'll all be proud to come and spend time with. With that said, I did want to touch on a couple of things that were brought up the last time that we might not have come forward through or talked about. So bear with me. Let's see. One of the questions that we were asked last time is why can't we locate the buildings next to the river, push it all adjacent to the river? And I'm not sure I really answered that the last time. First off, the community, when we met with them in the neighborhood, wanted to make sure that this community was walkable, that it was interesting as you walk down Riverfront Boulevard, that you had places to shop on both sides of the street. It was in the original plan that was contemplated for back in 2009. That's a very fundamental core of the idea. It's also very important to the retail. They need to be found and quickly. Where the grocery is driven by that's where they want to be. They need to be the first thing you see when you come down the road, and they want that iconic sign. And these are the requirements that they're communicating to us to be here on the landfill. Separate from kind of those design elements, there are a lot of environmental challenges as you move towards the river. There's a perimeter leachate system there that's collecting all of the contaminated water from the landfill. And I'm sure some of the residents who've been here, there was a very large pile right there at the corner for a long time. The reason was that that particular area is primarily underlain with a lot of peat. So it is continuing to settle over time. And it was left for the hope that it would induce more consolidation. So as you move closer to the river, the environmental challenges of settlement become much more extreme, and the piling becomes much deeper. The other thing that was shared on many occasions, as you get closer to the river, you get closer to the river. And there are a lot of water-related issues associated with being close to the river. One of the things that we're studying right now as we move forward is the relationship to earthquakes and the piling, and what will happen when there's an earthquake. And as you get closer to the river, you start to get concerned about something called liquefaction of the soil, where the soil, with the earthquake, interferes with the water, and as a result it liquefies, which, while the buildings are supported, it ultimately results in kind of impacting the strength of the piles. So moving the buildings to the river is not something that we can support from an engineering and design component. So finally, I would like to, I'm sorry to pressure, but the sense of urgency, we heard it from the mayor, we heard it from the community. There's a lot of things here that we've heard that really want that road through the community. Riverfront Boulevard, that's part of the first phase, is to make that connection. I can also attest that it's a lot of work to hold all these tenants who want to be here together. They have lots of places to locate throughout the country. Some of these are national, international tenants who they need to know that we're going to move forward. If we're not, there are other places for them to invest. As many of you know, riverfront's a really complex property. Beyond the refuse, the settlement, the methane collection, the flexible utility connections to the buildings, the soils that cover the landfill are extremely susceptible to weather. The ability to achieve compaction for the utility trenches, every roadway fill, every sidewalk subgrade is dependent upon the team executing these activities within a very limited weather window from June to October. If we miss that window, there isn't a remedy that we can practically implement. The project will have to be delayed to the next weather window in 2020. For our part, we've filed the plans for Riverfront Boulevard, the full engineering design, and submitted them to the city in hopes that with the city's support, we can work through the engineering design of Riverfront Boulevard. It can be distributed to the Department of Ecology for review, and we can be in position to start building that road in June so that we can make this year's winter weather. In addition, we have also filed plans with the city for all the piling and the advanced site work, the sewer, the extension of power, the extension of water, to support these buildings. As you can imagine, these activities, especially pilings, it's not recommended that we drive 300 piles 85 feet deep in the winter. We really need to get after these in the summer. Those plans also require Department of Ecology's approval, and they do entail complex special inspections from third-party engineers. It's not just the, not the run-of-mill soils engineer, but this is, advanced special inspections. The city needs to draw experts in to help support the evaluation. I guess in summary, this is a culmination of a lot of talented design team members, a lot of input from staff, a lot of input from the community. The plan provides the entertainment and recreational opportunities, as well as the housing that will greatly benefit the city, the retail, and the community. We've invested millions of dollars to this point in advancing our permit drawings in order to get this project construction ready this summer. We have key anchor tenants interested and engaged in the project. They've informed where we put the theater, they've informed where we put the grocer, how the restaurants engage. We've worked with our financial partners such that we can actually launch this project in the summer. The project is ready to go. With the support of the city and yourself and the community, it will be shovel-ready this summer. And it's culminating in a process that it's taken decades to get here, with many attempts that weren't successful, and we ask for your support and the community support to help us move it forward. Thank you.
So is now the time for the public comment? Okay. And then we'll close the hearing and then let the commission ask more questions? Okay, I want to get that order right. Thank you. So our first comment is from Mr. Alexander.
I may sound a little bit peripheral, but I first want to express my appreciation for the for the team, especially those who commented on the rivers, natural beauty, the valley, the mountains, the basic scenery we have here that you don't have in other places and is sometimes overlooked. But my real concern today, I am a riverologist, if there is such a thing, and I have to say that the Snohomish River has a long history of interference with well-intended projects. But I will be very brief. My concern is with one key point that I feel that increasing water levels already projected in the last meeting will interfere with this project, or could interfere, and that is the bridge over the Bigelow Creek. Now, this may sound peripheral, but I, for one, I cannot imagine your project in all its wonderful planning and detail can ever be fully successful without a fluid exchange, two-way exchange between the landfill project and the Simpson project. And the key hang-up there is the, as I see it, is the bridge over Bigelow Creek. Do you all have one of the handouts now, I guess? My understanding is that the city of Everett, well in advance of formal development, built that bridge, and it served its purpose and allowed many thousands of tons of landfill to be brought in, and including land that was used to settle the land beneath it, not to be there permanently. But it was too low. The bridge was too low. It was too poorly designed to accommodate floodwater. It will accommodate a shallow creek beneath. It will not accommodate the kinds of water that we projected last time for the next 40 to 50 years. So I've recommended, or am recommending, that the bridge be replaced, and that it be replaced by the city of Everett, not as part of this project. But my own timeline, from my own data, I can see about 12 to 15 years when a new bridge could be constructed relatively unhampered by the river. By the 50th year, you will have damaging floods every year, maybe several times a year. As far as tectonic plate slippage as a consequence, as causing subsidence that could be anywhere from tomorrow to a century. But I would rely very definitely on the data for a river evolution that would give you 12, maybe 15 years. Now, it will be costly. It will be inconvenient for people already living on the Simpson site, and indirectly inconvenient for the landfill site, for the customers that they will not be having, for the visitors they will not be having, for the business they will not be having because of that one bridge. Now, the bridge also occupies the site, the most logical site for a connection. That's Everett Boulevard, I believe. I've proposing that a temporary bridge be built about a half block to the south, enabling some inconvenience, but traffic nonetheless, while the old one is replaced. I don't mean a separate bridge, I mean replace it, because it will always be an obstruction. I think you can see from your own photographs on page 2, when I took that picture, it may not even have been a legal bridge. That stream, Bigelow Creek, historically is a salmon-bearing stream. My great-grandparents used to harvest several species of salmon with pitchforks there, salmon that spawned on mud bottoms. Now, in closing, I'd like to say again that I think that the city of Everett would not like to hear this, but I think it is better that if you're going to do such a job, then do it right. Take out the old bridge, put in one that is longer, higher, and capable of dealing with the kinds of floodwaters that we know are coming. And I want to thank you all for your kind attention. Let's see if I can get back here.
Next is Donna Gleisner, and would you please state your name and address?
Hi, I'm Donna Gleisner. I live at 2529 East Grand, so just a really long stone's throw north of the development. I know this is an incredibly challenging site, and it's very exciting to see it coming to fruition. I guess I'm going to go against the grain of everybody who wanted lots of shopping and a main road. I really feel like you fellows or people have missed the boat on the unique opportunity of having this development right along the river. You could put this development anywhere. It really doesn't showcase the river at all in my mind, except for the apartments that are going to be windows to the east. You haven't done any wedding cake tiering so that you have the apartments that are on the west side a little higher so they get the view to the east as well as the west above the freeway. I don't see much incorporation of the river as far as a beautiful, unique element. As far as real engagement with it, you have that one overlook, and that's it. So I really am disappointed, I guess. And I know it was tough for you to figure out what to do, but I am disappointed that you haven't done anything with that. I know the trees are going to be a big issue. If you can put trees along the trail and separate the parking lot that is right next to the trail, if you can separate the parking lot from the trail by some trees or bushes, certainly you don't want to discourage the views that people want to see, but some demarcation so that you have some natural area that you're walking along, not right next to a parking lot. I think that would be great. I'm also curious as to why the park has some mounds by the road, between the road and the parking lot for the park. It seems like wasted space to me, unless people are just supposed to sit on the mounds. I really don't understand that part. And I don't understand why, how two-bedroom apartment, which I would think would have at least 2 people in it, is only going to have 1.2 cars. I would think there'd be at least 2 cars, if not 3, if you have a mother and a father and a kid who's old enough to drive. So I don't understand that either, although I hate to see even more parking. So I know it's really late. You're probably not going to change your plan, but I just wanted to let you know what I think. Thank you.
Are we going to have the developers respond to public questions as part of this section?
That's up to the commission if you want to hear answers or comments or responses,
Okay, okay.
but I would suggest doing that at the end.
Okay, okay. Our final speaker is Katrina Lindahl. Please state your name and address.
Hi, I'm Katrina Lindahl, 2515 East Grand Avenue, and I'm going to say some of the same things that Donna did. And again, I think the design proposed for the riverfront development for the landfill site looks really great on paper, and I really appreciated the more in-depth overview, and I am more excited about it today than I was on the February 26th presentation. But again, it seems to have a good mix of retail, residential, open public areas, and office space to make it a viable, interactive, and entertainment center, which was supposed to have from the original plans. But in reality, this development could be plopped down anywhere in the country: a wheat field in Palouse, a prairie in Colorado, a landfill in Pittsburgh. I feel it does not adequately embrace the unique assets of the Snohomish River, the majesty of the Cascade Mountains, nor the rich essence of the city of Everett and what its citizens have to offer. Way back when this development was first shared with the citizens of Everett, a vision and a promise was made that this development would embrace the beauty and the assets of the Northwest and bring the riverfront to the community. The development would enable the public to interface with the river with walking trails, which it does have, public gathering spaces, which it does have, but not on the river, really close, and retail spaces, which it does have, but again, not close to the river, such as restaurants and cafes where you could sit inside and outside, taking in the beauty of the rivers and mountains, and businesses which, and also encourage businesses which embrace Northwest living. Though there is a wonderful walking trail on the river which connects to the small plaza, the focus of this development is on the Riverside Boulevard, which is a thoroughfare through the middle of the site. Much of the retail looks out onto the boulevard, which is going to be a busy street. Any retail facing the river is separated from the river by a large parking lot. The people living in the residential units are the ones who will benefit the most by the development, as many of them will have unobstructed elevated views of the river, valleys, and mountains. I'm not opposed to this, and people should be able to enjoy that, but also the visitors and customers that come to this development should have the opportunity to enjoy these amenities as well. I feel the public plaza should be expanded outward to the south and north as it reaches the river's edge to better accommodate public gatherings. There should be benches and tables to sit at while enjoying the outdoor ambiance while having a coffee, enjoying a meal, or reading a book, and I did see some more of that explained today. This plaza should be lined with retail space for restaurant and cafes or other businesses that may want to embrace the riverfront. A landing space for small boats could even be added to so people can dock and walk to the development. A lot of people do come up the river in their boats and fish, and it would be a great spot to land and stop and have a sandwich. As the connection to the river is so important to this development, I feel stage 1 should include the build-out of the plaza east to the river, which is now slated for stage 3. We need this connection sooner than later, but if this space could be redesigned, then I'd be unopposed to having that redesigned space move to stage 2 or stage 3. If there is parking on the river's edge, a green buffer plant should be installed to separate the walking trail from the parking lot. And I also noticed in this today that the connection from the walking trail to the plaza is only from the north and not from the south. And many people will be coming from Lowell and want to access this the riverfront development, not just from the north. So there should be a pathway connection from both directions from the walking trail. I did really enjoy the description of the landscape, the expanded description of the landscape, and because from the February 26th presentation. It sounded like it was going to be minimized, but I feel like you will be addressing that. I want to make sure that the landscape is not compromised, even though this is a challenging place to put landscape in. It was further explained to us that providing irrigation may be challenging as well, because you have to collect all the groundwater, which must be diverted and put into the stormwater. So irrigation is really a necessity to adequately maintain landscapes in challenging sites such as this development. Landscape technology has improved considerably over the years in the effort to conserve. Landscape and irrigation technology has improved considerably over the years in the effort to conserve this natural resource. I feel an efficient system can be designed which will redirect water where it is needed and reduce runoff. If there is some runoff from the irrigation, it can be collected in the stormwater system, which is required to this development. These collection sites can be attractive bioswales and rain gardens or creative hardscape collection methods, which can further enhance the site. This development, the other thing I missed, I'm sorry. All lighting should abide by the dark sky lighting protocol, in which all exterior lighting is shielded from the sky and illuminates downward toward the ground. This means the large illuminated signs for the theater and market is inappropriate, is designed, and alternative ways to illuminate them should be considered. This development has been put on a fast track, but we have waited a long time for this project to become viable. We should not compromise its potential because of budgets and timelines. This development should be a destination spot for people from the entire region to enjoy and utilize. Please fulfill the primary vision for this site and open the riverfront up to the people. Thank you.
Thank you. There was one question from the audience for the developers. Would you come forward and give us your name and address, please?
My name is Vicki Rosenow. I live at 2307 Maple. I was wondering if all of the retail is on ground level, because there are some places that, you know, you would put a restaurant at the top of one of these tall buildings to be able to see out over the river. Is all the retail at ground level? Yes? Okay. Well, just was wondering about that. And just a general question, I haven't attended all these meetings, but for children that move into this area, what school are they impacting? Are the grade school kids going to Lowell Elementary? Have people thought about that or wondered? I don't know, you have no idea how many children will be there, but obviously they're going to go to school if there are children there. And so I was just curious about that, and if Lowell Elementary knows this is coming.
The Everett School District knows that it's coming, and they're negotiating either negotiating a school impact fee or collecting the impact fee that our city ordinance requires, but they have been in discussions with the school district. So
the junior high or the middle school kids would go to North Middle, and the high school kids would go to Everett High or Cascade. Do you know that?
I don't have the answer to that. I know that the school district is working on some boundary issues between schools at this point, so I don't have a definitive answer.
Yeah, that predates this, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And is there any empty space to be left in this area to fill in with, I don't know, someday maybe they need a grade school down there, or they need to add something or convert something? Is there any empty space being left, or is all of this being filled?
That's not anticipated on this site, and because of its being a landfill, the Department of Ecology probably would not allow a school or a park on the site.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. So at this time, we could just close the hearing and have the developer respond to any of these comments later, or should we have them do that now?
It's up to the commission.
I think we could have them answer questions at one time, right? From us and the public?
Madam Chairman?
Yeah.
Would it appropriate to close the public hearing if you're going to, move into the discussion stage?
Oh, okay.
But
That's what I was getting ready to.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
okay. So at this point, I would entertain a motion to close the hearing.
So moved.
You'll hear a second.
Second.
Commissioner Finch,
Yes.
Commissioner McGinn,
Yes.
Commissioner Yanusak,
Yes.
Commissioner Tisdall,
Yes.
Acting Chair Lavra.
Yes. Okay, thank you. So would you like to respond to some of those questions?
I would. I wrote down fast, so forgive me if I didn't get them all. If I could, forgive me. That's the. One of the things I think that we've struggled with to try to convey to the community and to others is how big these spaces are. The dimensions between building, what's shown labeled here as Building B, and across the public plaza to the other building, my recollection is these are over 200 feet wide. So these are significantly larger than the original plan contemplated. And the intent was that you could have that kind of natural environment experience with the inspired landscape concept that Nick came up with, and still have all of it ringed with restaurants on that public plaza on both sides. The theater will attract a lot of activity at night, and we hope that you'll come and have dinner, grab a quick bite. I'm sure a lot of people will buy popcorn or candy before they go to the theater to save money. So all of those uses are anticipated to be fronted on the public plaza, as well as the second phase. If I go back, the width carries through on the central gathering space. It is larger. This is, I want to say it's well over the 1.5 acres that was originally contemplated. It has the opportunity, we intend to front restaurants and other uses. There's a small little building right here. We call it a jewel box. We've had discussions with businesses like, I think they call themselves Shake Shack, places where you come get some ice cream. When we talked to the Economic Development Office with the city way back when, it was envisioned that there would be concerts here, that you would be able to spill out. And so these inspirational images were actually what we were hoping to have accomplished here, that you would come. The boardwalk-related feel of these pedestrian experiences were also part of the concept to try to achieve that. This is the more opportune location for views. So the original central gathering space was slightly shifted, and the plaza wasn't actually connected to the central gathering space in the original plan. So this is the main view corridor where you can see, if you're standing there, the river. So we've organized the buildings in that way. John's design was that these areas, part of the buildings, would be rooftop decks. They are set lower, so that they have that kind of, not necessarily wedding cake experience, but kind of that modulation of buildings. Again, they're focused on the primary view corridor, so you could be out there on the deck. They're the larger areas. As John indicated, all of the buildings have rooftop decks for barbecue. We don't want to have somebody in one of the buildings want to grab their chicken and run to the next building to do a barbecue. So every building has to have that. We wanted it to not be part of your shopping experience, to be experiencing somebody else's barbecue. So we felt that it was better to locate in a more quiet place, because that's how the residents would engage. The site has a lot of landscape requirements. The site has a provision in the consent decree that if the site isn't improved, it has to be fenced, or it has to be preserved, improved with all of the methane collection components. So the site has a fairly significant amount of perimeter buffer areas that will be fenced so that you can't essentially go into areas where there isn't methane collection. As many of you probably experienced, we brought the whole site up approximately 3 feet to try to provide a greater distance between ourselves and the refuse, to also consider the stormwater considerations that, Alex brought up. The other component of that is there is, as if you've walked the trail, which it's a beautiful trail, it's significantly lower than the site. So we're approximately 15 feet above the trail, this blue line here, and then it's buffered with perimeter buffer landscaping that Nick will design. And then we wanted to provide an access from the riverfront trail to the central gathering space. We felt that there are some environmental issues associated with the there's a pump station, which probably some of you have seen, with a generator. It's not the prettiest thing to walk by. It's not bad as pump stations go. But we felt like we wanted to make that pedestrian experience as you come around the roundabout and along Riverfront Boulevard to be a very viable pedestrian pathway, and not forget about it as you came in. It's our entry, it's our sense of arrival. We hoped that the main road would have significant islands, 10 feet wide, that would have things like the natural grasses that you would see in along a stream. We were hoping to put, with the fire marshal's approval, logs in there that you might find on a washout from a stream event. So I hope all of our work here has been inspired by our surroundings to the extent we can. We've organized the buildings with the thought of finding these view corridors, but still providing enough activity and enough density to support the retail, the restaurants, that would not only line here, but also, as Gary mentioned, the exercise tenants that we heard people wanted, the Orange Theory, the 24 Fitness, the daily use, the pharmacy stores, all of those things need that kind of support. It's not shown here on our plans, but the original concept, as we understood it, and we've been studying it for 10 years, the 3-acre park provided a real connection to the river. It's a very natural passive park. It's a park that the city designed. The original capital facility plan for the park was a $12 million improvement in the city's budget. It is the city's design. They have provided us the plans. It's being moved forward with the same team that the city retained, with the same concepts of providing that riverfront access, that connection to it, while at the same time maintaining some safety. I'm sure some of you walked by the crane. It's not a great thing to be standing by and think about your kids running up and down. So it will go away, but some of the character of the site was informed by that form and trying to draw it in. Let me see. So the concept of the park mounds is really geared towards trying to create some variation in the overall experience as you walk, to merchandise the experience. So the hope is that it isn't just a flat site, which it currently is, but give it some vertical relief, so make the pedestrian experience interesting and engaging and make you want to stop and make you want to shop at or grab an ice cream. It allows us, by mounding up, to include a different variety of plants, the more significant trees. All of the landscaping isn't not irrigated. I'm sorry if that wasn't clear. We are bound by the consent decree to make sure that our landscaping irrigation doesn't penetrate and essentially add more water to the refuse and then further contaminate a shallow aquifer. So all of the irrigation has to be collected and sealed before it gets anywhere. By the same token, we need to make sure that the plants don't require irrigation for the same sort of environmental reasons the woman referenced. We're much more sophisticated now in the way we irrigate things, and we're also more sensitive now from a sustainable to choose plants that don't require that we irrigate them like a soccer field. The irrigation is set up in a way so that it can be shut off and the plants can survive. And Nick's palette of plants was chosen with that thought in mind, that he would get the plants established, it would look great, it would feel great. We're making a very significant investment. We want to make sure it feels good, but at the same time, we do want to turn it off so that we're not constantly adding risk to contaminating the aquifer. One of the things I don't think is often clear, there is only one public improvement on the riverfront. The Riverfront Boulevard will be a public road. It will be a road that everyone can travel on. Everything within that public road, the city will own as a public road. Everything outside of the public road is owned and maintained by Shelter Holdings. All that obligation associated with the methane collection under the parking lots, under the buildings, all of the stormwater improvements under the parking lots, those are all private systems. There's a perimeter methane collection system that the city installed, which is part of the consent decree, which they will continue to own and we will connect to. But all of the improvements proper for this mixed-use center will be private. We work in a lot of different cities, and some of us have been around longer than others. We work throughout the region. Parking's always an issue. A lot of the mixed-use buildings that we build in Redmond and Seattle have all different standards. Everett adopted what we consider to be rather informed parking standards for mixed-use development in the Metro Everett area. It is what we experience in our communities. We have one in Mill Creek, we have one in Redmond and Bellevue. We believe that's the appropriate parking that's been implemented in Metro Everett to be implemented here, and it's consistent with the demand of what we see. This is primarily what we hope to be workforce housing. We are supporting jobs. So these are people who work at Boeing. These are people working at Angels, the ice rink, I hope. There are people who work at the theater. There are people who work in surrounding businesses. They hope to work at the airport. So this is primarily workforce housing, and it's a mix of studios, 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms. So it's not anticipated that it would be a lot of families. But one of the reasons why the project is phased is because we need to get it started and get a theater and a grocer, and that may influence how the future phases are done. And we may see a slightly different mix that needs to be developed. Maybe there'll be a need for more 2 bedrooms. candidly, when we look at the market, some of us are all getting older, and we see that there may be more demand for senior housing. And they have a slightly different mix and a slightly different consideration in terms of both parking and capital facilities. So the one thing that's nice about phasing the project this way is it does let us all adapt. And if we find out there's a real demand for a medical clinic and they want to be there, we have the opportunity to adapt. If we find that there's a Bright Horizons or a type of childcare that wants to be close to the 3-acre park, we have the opportunity to do that. And it'll influence and inform. And I think one of the things that's nice in the work that the city has done is that the program allows us to kind of respond to the market and adapt. The reason why the project is phased the way it is that we heard very loud and clear, I want that theater, I desperately need that grocery store, I need there to be a place here. And so our hope was to move forward with this first phase, and then the second phase, complete everything on the other side on the west side of Riverfront Boulevard, and get that side complete so it feels great. When we build anything out here, anything that isn't complete has to be fenced and secured. So jumping across to the public plaza creates a problem because it isn't essentially, it's creating an area that essentially encourages people to not have there'd be nothing there to engage them. So we want to have the retail and the housing there to support it. Gary and the group have invested large sums of money cleaning up the Riverfront Trail from homeless encampments. So we pay fairly particular attention to making sure we don't, in our efforts, create other spaces for that to occur. And with the city and the police department, we've been able to work through that, but that's part of the thought process of why let's get everything on the west side of Riverfront Boulevard complete, established, and then work our way to the other side.
At this time, I think maybe we better leave some time for the commissioners to ask questions and make comments.
There was a lot of questions. I'm sorry if I missed any of them.
Thank you, though. Thank you. I think we had some questions. Did you have a question?
Sure, I'll start. Thank you for your presentation tonight, and to all of your consultants and planning staff for answering far too many of my questions over the last couple of weeks. I think that your presentation tonight was much more complete than the February 26th presentation and touched upon a lot of my questions. However, questions do remain, and I'm hoping you can walk us through your decision not to include Building 2A in this initial phase, given the requirement to fence off that area, and how you're planning to activate the central gathering space in advance of building out Phase 2.
When we developed a phasing plan, we're trying to make sure that we accommodate all of the uses and the required open space and parking. But we're also trying to balance the cost. The first phase is very heavy for us. We have to build the full Riverfront Boulevard, which is a very expensive undertaking. It has to have all the methane collection. We have to loop the water line from the bridge all the way to 36. It's a significant 14-inch water main that creates the loop. We have to create all of the stormwater connections for the overall community. So the first phase is fairly heavily weighted with a lot of infrastructure. And it's a lot of work to get everybody comfortable with the first phase. With that, though, there is a certain amount of support from a market that the property can support. We don't want to be in a situation where we have a bunch of vacant units that don't have anybody there, or a bunch of vacant retail. The market, from the market study we have studied, can support anywhere from 20 to 40 homes a month in terms of absorption. So that's where we kind of drawing the line of not building too much, but at the same time building enough that we cover some of those costs. our plan is to roll every August with piling. So if you look at the advanced site work permits that are in and that are coming, we actually do build all of the power from 36 across. We build all of the, in the advanced site work, the methane collection in phase 2, with the hope that come August of 2020, we'll be piling phase 2A. And by the time the theater opens in April of 2021, the buildings in phase 2A are under construction and up, and we'd be on to framing. So that's the sequence that we had. So we don't want to get too far in front of us because we can't financially afford it. At the same time, want to create enough momentum that the project can sequentially move through.
Okay, great. No, thanks for that. And can you walk us through the timeline associated with the various phases?
So the hope is that in June, we're building the road, regrading. There's some material still left on the little triangle portion that needs to get over there onto the main portion of the landfill. We think it'll take a year to build the road. It's about 2 years to build 300 units of housing. So from June of this year to April of 2021, we hope to be open. And then from there, every phase is intended to be a year after. So April 2022 would be phase 2, April 2023 would be phase 3, and so forth. So the one thing that's nice about the shelter holdings is they have the financial resources to do this. But by the same token, when it's so heavily loaded with all the road and the methane collection, we don't really start getting this moving until we're really into the third phase. So we're very motivated to kind of continue, and that's why that, but at the same time trying to be respectful of the market can only support so much. And Gary mentioned earlier, we don't control everything. There are corrections in the market, and so it's very important when we have things together to move, but we also have to adapt at times. And if it turns out the best way to move forward is to bring in some seniors, we may come back and say this is where we're going to put the senior housing type of thing.
Great, thank you.
Commissioner McGinn?
Yeah, so I think I'd like to start by thanking the landscape architect and the architect for additional renderings today and for really helping to explain what the vision is. I think that that's helpful for us, but also helpful for the public, and it's exciting to see the direction that you hope to take this project. I was really excited to see the development of that public plaza in particular, because I think it starts to describe what the public is hoping to see on the river itself. But where I'm seeing the disconnect between public comment and what I see on the screen is along that trail, along that walking trail, you are walking past what seems like miles of parking lot. So I do understand where people are coming from when they see this. They see a very narrow connection to the river, and I don't think I've heard anyone ask for buildings on the river. And I do think that this is the appropriate siting for buildings themselves, from an ecological standpoint, from an economic standpoint. What I do think there's an opportunity for is a thinning of some of that parking lot along the riverfront and an incorporation of some of those same concepts that you're introducing in the plaza area to the river itself, so that you're encouraging more activity on the riverfront and really activating that trail. One of my biggest concerns from a safety standpoint is the isolation of that walking trail from any activity happening within the development. Because I think given our, I think it's a little irresponsible to be including public amenities that are disconnected visually, physically from the activity, you know, when we're struggling with issues like the drug epidemic that are causing some really serious problems in our existing parks and public open spaces. And to include public open space that is so isolated, it's a public safety, I think, issue. I do understand more about the siting of that 3-acre park. It helps to know that that was established by the city, it's city property. That was something that was designed by the city. I do wonder if we could create a stronger connection, though, between maybe the public plaza and that park. So we're creating a really strong pedestrian connection there that might address some of those public safety concerns. Even just an intermittent thinning of that parking area along the river would do a tremendous amount to activate the park, or to activate the path, the walking path, and to encourage people to come to that waterfront edge and use it. You know, if you had some of those whimsical elements that Nick was talking about along the riverfront itself, and you're incorporating some berms and some textural hardscape elements, you know, some stepping where people could sit and enjoy the river. They could get their lunch at one of the restaurants and just bring it down there. You know, if there's rocks down there for their kids to climb on, those kinds of things they go a long way toward activating that riverfront, providing that public access, but also minimizing the overall building structure that you have going on. Although I have to say another concern of mine is seeing a lot of service spaces oriented toward the river. I do understand that, I mean, as an architect, I know how hard it is to incorporate service spaces and to provide a building that is enjoyable from all sides. However, I do think that we could see a little bit more activation on that east side from some buildings, maybe not all, and a little less service space, certainly a lot less parking there, particularly around this eastern part of the plaza. Read through my notes really quickly just to make sure that I hit all of my concern points. And I think that's the majority of it.
Okay. We never want to build more parking than the market requires
Sure.
or needs.
Oh, and I'm not suggesting that you reduce the overall parking by any means.
Okay.
I just think that that is such prime real estate, and to put all the parking along that edge is maybe a little much. You know, you could thin that amount of parking in selective areas and redistribute it elsewhere. And I think that that would do a lot of good. You know, if that plaza is 200 feet or more wide, then the parking is at least 400 feet deep, which is a little outrageous. I mean, I don't know that you would really experience anything about the waterfront from those buildings at all. but it also reinforces the isolation of that walking trail. You know, I'm not going to use that walking trail if I feel like I'm 400 feet away from anybody who could hear me in trouble, or, you know, I think that that could create a really attractive destination for someone who didn't want to be seen, which is not, obviously not what you're intending, but.
Yeah. I do want to be clear. I don't, the Lowell Riverfront Trail is wonderful. I mean, I've ridden on my bike, I've walked on it many a time. It's not, I don't want it to make it sound like that we have any information whatsoever that anyone has experienced any life safety related experiences on that trail. It's a great trail. People use it, they ride their bike, they walk on it continuously. Where we have experienced encampments has been quite a ways away from the trail and in areas that are in this area that are well removed from the trail. This trail, it's a beautiful trail. McLeod Record designed it with the city. It continues all the way around. It's very, very well informed. It has all those natural things, but it is significantly far from the river. In a couple locations, it's close, but in these locations, you don't experience the river as you walk along the trail. It's only in certain locations.
And I think it's those areas particularly where the trail does come close to the river, where it'd be most beneficial to bring some of that plaza activity toward the riverfront. And that would give you the opportunity to maintain parking where you need it and parking where you have it, where the parking is further removed from the river and you're not really gaining anything by putting plaza space there.
I would disagree. I mean, part of what we heard from the community was that they did want this overlook at the end of the plaza,
Sure,
that they would look out and that they could have that pedestrian connection from that overlook down to the riverfront
I'm sorry
trail.
if I wasn't clear. I meant the parking area along that trail that's more to the south.
This area here.
Yes.
Okay.
Makes total sense. I think that that's a really appropriate place for that. When you start to get further north toward your plaza, that parking area may be better suited to strengthening that plaza and bringing it out and allowing it to interact with that trail. And you're close enough to the river at that point to really enjoy the riverfront as well. And in that way, you're not sacrificing a tremendous amount of parking in that area, having to relocate that elsewhere on the site. But, you know, I hear you that the current homeless encampment and that issue is located in that wilderness area. I still think that the presence there near the trail should be a concern.
Having done homeless housing and veteran housing, have a high degree of respect for people transitioning from homelessness. I would say that creating a place here is really important. That there is a 24-hour presence, that people are activating these plazas, that it is vibrant. So we've structured our program in such a way so that we could have each phase be vibrant on its own and sustain and not have areas that might not be. By the same token, we've tried to spend a fair amount of time and effort thinking through these passageways and places of respite where you might stop, protection from weather, that can be kind of emphasizing those sight lines that you're talking about. I do think that it's important in this process to recognize that we're approving a concept, a master plan. We're not approving a specific parking location at this time. A lot of that gets informed by how the project will evolve. I appreciate your interest for the proximity to the river and the connection. I completely understand that. I don't think I want to be so obstinate that we won't work through these kind of components as we refine the project. As a master plan, it's kind of, as you well know, as an architect, it's a much higher level of planning than where we're putting parking and how we plan the landscaping adjacent to the parking.
Sure, yeah, no, I hear you. And I appreciate that this has been a long process for you. I do understand that. I also understand that in city planning terms, 10 years is, nothing. 40 years, now we're starting to get somewhere, But I think conceptually, I was very excited to see this. I still am. I'm more excited after having seen more renderings, and I love the attention to detail that was put into the public plaza shown. I think that that is going in the right direction, and I do think that that is a valuable public asset. I think that there are concerns that I have that give me pause. I'd like to see some further development happen in the overall plan, but I don't want you to confuse my concerns for a lack of enthusiasm, because 2 thumbs up, this is great. This is something that I think will be an asset to our community. That being said, I'm going to have my concerns. Until I see some further development, I'm going to have my concerns.
I appreciate that, and we hear you. If your concerns are such, in deference to all the people who have helped and supported this, we just ask that you make a decision today.
Alan.
I would like to comment that part of the plan that you're approving includes design guidelines that address a lot of these details that we don't address at this site plan level, but there are development standards and design guidelines in the attachments to the development agreement that will help guide how these spaces are planned in more detail at the construction phase.
I did notice that in terms of how the buildings are responding to the boulevard. I didn't see any specific language about how the buildings respond to the waterfront site in the document. Is that something that we could include before we make a decision?
I'd be hard pressed to say that we could do that tonight. I mean, that's obviously not something that we could do tonight, and we're recommending moving this forward. If there are concerns that you don't see in the details for the design guidelines, I think that's something that we can note and work on between now and the time that it goes to the city council, perhaps to add something that responds to that. But I think you'll find that the details in the design guidelines are, really responding to the architecture and what gets built. This is not a pristine site. This is a reclamation job. I mean, this is the river, the green space to the east of the trail. All of that's been part of the public amenities that have been already developed and planned for. On the side slope of the landfill, we can't really have people actively recreating on that because of the methane collection, and it's a landfill still, and so there's not a lot that we can do there. It's really what gets the design guidelines focus on the hardscape and what gets built between the buildings and the plazas and the landscape that goes along with that. It doesn't really respond to the river.
Any other commissioner comments or questions?
Mine only is good job. I appreciate the thoroughness and your team that you've assembled, and I'm excited to move this thing forward.
Thank you, and we appreciate all the input.
Yes.
I just wanted to make a couple comments on behalf of Mayor Franklin. She couldn't be more enthusiastic about this project. I think she's looked at all 3 iterations, and hands down, this is the best that's come forward. We don't need 500,000 square feet of retail in Everett. We need 1,250 living units for families. Eric, Gary, and his team have done an incredible job with a very, very difficult site. I think the stories that previous developers told this community about this property were challenged at best in terms of what we could expect. And so I think we have not only a good plan, but a really good plan that's actually real. And yeah, the administration couldn't be more supportive of the hard work that they've done and the opportunities that this creates. Certainly, both the Planning Commission has perfected this, and the council will continue to in the next month. But we're very excited about the opportunity this creates for the city of Everett.
Do I have a motion to approve the resolution 1907?
So moved.
We have a revised.
Yes, so we have, everybody has the revised.
Right,
That's the one we're talking about, the revised?
Yes, I think so.
We just
Okay.
got this tonight, so I,
Because we've got both, they're both
Okay.
in our package.
now, just so I'm clear, Alan, we're voting on the revised resolution with changes suggested by Commissioner Beck, Chair Beck, correct?
Yes. Yes, those have been incorporated into the draft that's before you.
Okay, and there will be, am I understanding correctly, that there will be opportunity to have additional discussion about subsequent phases in the future? And how those are resolved?
Probably not before the Planning Commission and City Council. This really sets the stage with the development agreement and the design guidelines and development standards for the developer to work with the city on, how those guidelines get implemented on a phase-by-phase basis at the time of construction. There would be, I guess if there was interest in us working with the developer between now and the time that it goes to the City Council for some refinements to some of the existing design guidelines, if there are some specific things that you might want us to see. I think that's something that you could pass along either tonight or as a member of the public between now and the time that it goes to the City Council. And I think the developer's team has been very responsive to the feedback that they've heard. So, if you wanted to put something in writing that more clearly articulates the type of things that you think might go into the guidelines, that you could do that as a member of the public.
Okay. Thank you.
I guess before we go, I just want, small thing, just on the word "a" should maybe be "and" in the whereas number 2. I don't know if we need to correct typos here, but just.
We'll catch it.
Okay, we can fix that.
So I would make a motion that we approve resolution 19-07.
I think, Michael,
I think there's an open.
Commissioner Finch.
Okay.
So do we have a second?
I'd second it.
Okay.
Commissioner Finch,
Yes.
Commissioner McGinn,
Yes.
Commissioner Yanasak,
Yes.
Commissioner Tisdall,
Yes.
Acting Chair Laverne.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, I think the meeting is closed.